This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run to the markets here for you. Kenya got a freshly listed firm today. It's essentially in the mid-cap segment. The entertainment and events firm Homeboys Entertainment. It listed by introduction, 63.2 million shares on the bourse, valued at about 290 or so million shillings because their price is around 4 shillings and 60 cents a piece. No trading as such on the first day, though. Tesla also made its debut in the S&P 500. It accounted for roughly 1.7% of the index, but it stumbled on its first day of trading as part of the index, down by nearly 5.9% at 16:23 GMT. That said, the firm's shares have gone up by over 750% so far in 2020 to a peak of at least $695 a share. At that price, it has a market cap of around $650 billion. Here's what's coming up tonight. South Africa's economy is forecast to grow by nearly 4% next year. More than 40 countries and counting are banning UK arrivals after concerns about a new strain of COVID-19. And Nigeria is facing severe food scarcity due to rising insecurity. All that and more is in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start in the continent's most industrialized economy, South Africa. Its economy is now forecast to expand by 3.9% in 2021 after contracting by nearly twice that rate in 2020. That's according to a recent Reuters poll. This comes after a fairly strong showing in the third quarter where the economy rebounded fairly strongly as pandemic restrictions were relaxed and mining and manufacturing led a broad-based expansion. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola.
The economy shrank due to government-induced COVID-19 related restrictions imposed since March, and it's been suggested that the economy would contract by 7.4% this year and take some time to fully recover to pre-2019 levels.
Because simply there's some things we don't know. We don't know if the second wave is going to impact the first quarter of next year, which would then result in very bad growth outcomes. But I think if everything works and we don't have a long lockdown, we end all these lockdown situations early in January, then I think 3.5% to 4% is very, very likely. And on the positive side, if things go really well for us and commodity prices keep and remain high and go a bit higher, we could even reach 5%, which would be amazing.
There's another silver lining brought about by the pandemic. The country normally runs a current account deficit. It's been in surplus for several months now because consumers haven't been spending as much as previously.
And that positiveness with our current account will impact on other things like the currency and probably on interest rates. And that is a very big positive for South Africa over the next year that I foresee.
The key data point being monitored is the broad unemployment rate, now pegged at 43% and likely to increase.
And the reason for this is that we have lost a lot of jobs, but we're still likely to lose a little bit more because as the help from the TERS and from other government initiatives fade, a lot of places will be laid bare.
The country's economy remains in dire straits and it's going to take focus and commitment from all the players involved to get it back on track to at least pre-COVID conditions. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now we're still in the country. Residents there are deeply concerned about the high rates of COVID-19 infections being reported in the country. And many are now skeptical about overseas travel during the festive season and they're opting to stay with family. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with that report.
With over 912,000 COVID-19 infections, South Africa has kicked off the festive season in the midst of a second wave, which is being driven by a new variant. As a result, many people are avoiding crowded gatherings and international travel, including the Mulatto brothers, who are remaining in the mother city for their annual break. For them, the global pandemic and overseas travel poses too much risk.
I chose to stay in the country due to the uncertainties of COVID. I can recall well before few weeks before coronavirus strike, of which in some other parts of the world it started making some kind of a peak, and there were some other trips that were supposed to be considered.
By staying within the safety of a family circle and avoiding unnecessary social gatherings, they are able to stay safe and have an enjoyable coastal holiday in Cape Town. With a COVID-19 infection rate that is now topping over 10,000 new infections a day, many other South Africans are also doing the same until things cool down.
One will just observe in the context of development, and that will basically indicate whether is it safe to travel or not. At the current moment, I don't think I will do that up until one is basically is quite sure of the current circumstances.
And with little to no tourists around, many of Cape Town's famed hotspots such as Signal Hill and Lion's Head still offer them great uncongested space to unwind. With white sandy beaches and a majestic mountain range, it's easy to see why so many people have chosen the mother city over other top international destinations that still remain open. The beaches are where most are ending up, even though authorities continue to voice concern about the potential for super spreader events, especially in congested spots.
Coronavirus is a current thing, and people are filled with fear with regards to it, and supposedly so people are not going out, or I supposedly I'm not going out because of such illnesses that have occurred, particularly from hospitals, from even people that we know. Some of them are no more.
But now COVID-19 has already touched many South Africans on a personal level, including the mulattoes. And while this may be an unprecedented disruption to many people's holiday plans, there is a belief that the tide will begin turning and the country will once again end on a path to normality. Nevis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Let's move on to Tanzania now. The Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation is optimistic that the host-to-government agreement negotiations between itself and international oil and gas companies on exploitation of liquefied natural gas deposits that are sitting offshore should resume in January 2021. Now, this comes after these talks stalled for roughly a year following the government's decision to review production sharing agreements. According to reports, Tanzania is seeking to scrap sections on the contract that seem to be tilted against it. The East African nation and project developers were initially expected to have wrapped up talks by September last year. And that decision, had it been arrived at, could have paved the way for a final investment decision to be made. All right, then, so let's explore this in a bit more detail. CGTN's Daniel Kijo joins us now live from Dar es Salaam with more data on this story. So, Daniel, these talks on how to exploit the natural gas deposits offshore have been in progress for years. But what are the main issues that the IOCs and Tanzania's government are simply not seeing eye to eye on?
Hi, Rama. Well, indeed, Tanzania, to start with, Tanzania has about 57.7 trillion cubic feet of natural reserves. So indeed, it has unlimited potential for investors in these two sectors, especially in the Lindi and Mtwara region. But yes, as you said, talks between the government and IOCs have been stalling. I remember this is because the government wanted to look at the PSA, production sharing agreement, to review them and make sure that Tanzanians have a share, benefit from these resources. So, like you said, there are reports that Tanzania has changed some of the clauses in the agreement and are looking at all the clauses that work against the country's interest. Now, these host government agreements negotiation have been on air, like historically, they've been on and off for a while now. They started, in fact, 2017, then due to technical difficulties, they resumed again in 2018, and then again in April 2018, the hitch happened where the Attorney General of Tanzania had to review these PSAs, and now it's still not open public knowledge on exactly what are the details of that ongoing between the discussions between the government and IOCs. But from the conduct and messaging from the Tanzanian government, it seems that all these are being done in order to ensure that the citizens resources now benefit from these resources and not make the mistake that has been seen in other sectors like the mining sector. From what we know is that the government has already paid about $2.something million, which is about 5 billion Tanzanian shillings to citizens living in Lindi area to move them as compensation, to move them from the areas in which this exploration would be done starting 2021, if indeed these negotiations are cleared.
Indeed. One last question for you, Daniel. The fact is there's also talks on another project, a near 1,500-kilometer pipeline to handle crude oil from Hoima in western Uganda all the way to the coast in Tanzania for export. Those talks were supposed to be wrapped up this month. Has that target been met?
Hey, Ramah. Now, that is another big project for Tanzania. Now, we know that President Magufuli and Ugandan President Museveni met and sort of signed an agreement to sign and close the HGA or host government agreement issue. They met in September, and about 2 weeks ago, I got confirmation that indeed Tanzania has signed their side of the host government agreements for the East African crude oil pipeline. In fact, before the December deadline we were talking about. Now, this is a huge project, $3.5 billion has been expected to cost this project, and from now on, since the signing has been done, we expect companies to start processing tendering. This signing of this host government agreement, Rama, basically means that Uganda and Tanzania have given a consent for these companies to start the work on their land. Now, as you know, this is a key pipeline for East Africa and more importantly for Uganda and Tanzania, and obviously since Uganda discovered the crude oil in 2006, this has been something that they've been pursuing. So we expect that coming in the next coming year, companies will start tendering and then things will move on. It's expected to provide employment for about 18,000 people. So it's a big project and indeed one of the biggest crude oil projects in the world.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Daniel Kijo in Dar es Salaam. Thank you. All right, then I'll run through some company news. Starting, of course, in Kenya. Homeboys Entertainment, as I mentioned, today listed on the Growth Enterprise Market segment, or the GEM segment, as is more commonly known, on the Nairobi Securities Exchange. It's now the first entertainment company to join the region's largest securities exchange. It listed by introduction, as I mentioned earlier, 63.2 million ordinary shares coming to market, priced at around 4 shillings and 66 cents. Founded in 1995, Homeboys Entertainment is East Africa's largest entertainment company with business interests in events management and production, public relations, sports, live TV production and training as well. Kenya Airways and Air France KLM have agreed to mutually terminate their Africa-Europe joint venture partnership from September next year. The airlines had previously suspended the JV cooperation for the calendar year 2020, mainly due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent unpredictability of a return to normalcy in commercial aviation operations. Kenya Airways CEO Alan Kilavuka said that the Kenyan carrier will continue to serve the European market through gateways in London, Paris, Amsterdam, with Rome slated for resumption next year as well. Sasol has has signed an agreement to sell its full shareholding in a Mozambique gas-to-power plant for $145 million. This comes as the company continues to offload assets in an attempt to bolster its balance sheet. The company announced on Monday that the divestment in Central Temica Beresano Garcia, which is located in the border between South Africa and Mozambique, is still subject to regulatory approvals. Sasol owns a 49% stake in that project. The rest of the shareholding is held by Mozambique's state-owned electricity company. And finally, the head of Europe's Aviation Safety Agency says he's certain that Boeing 737 MAX is now safe to fly. The regulator said his organization had left no stone unturned in its review of the aircraft and its analysis of design changes made by the American manufacturer. The plane was grounded in March 2019, as you might recall, after it was involved in 2 catastrophic accidents in which a total of 346 people died. It's been cleared to resume flights in the United States and Brazil. European regulators expect to give permission for it to return to service in the continent in the middle of January. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 15 minutes into the hour. There's plenty more content coming up, including this. "40 countries and counting are banning UK arrivals after concerns about a new strain of COVID-19. And tensions between China and Australia stall talks on a review of a free trade agreement.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, several countries around the world have banned flights and travelers from the UK in a bid to stop the spread of a new mutated strain of COVID-19. The UK over the weekend warned of a new coronavirus variant that is thought to be up to 70% more transmissible than the original strain of the virus. Now, according to the World Health Organization, this new variation has so far been identified in Denmark, the Netherlands and Australia, other than the UK. News of this strain forced the British government to backtrack on plans to let families mix freely over Christmas. The country has now imposed deeper, tighter pandemic restrictions on London and other areas in southern England where infections by this coronavirus mutation are heavily concentrated. All right, then, so let's get you the latest on this from the UK. CGTN's Catherine Drew joins us from that part of the world. Catherine, the Prime Minister did hold an emergency meeting today to discuss the flow of freight into and out of the country amidst all these new pandemic restrictions and the flight restrictions that we're seeing. What are the outcomes from that meeting?
Well, we've just been hearing from the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary in the last hour, actually, and Boris Johnson came out full of good humour and saying that confident that things would be resolved, but it was really notably lacking in any detail. So for those people stuck with lorries full of food, for travellers stuck at ports and airports around the world, he really had very little concrete to say, except that the government was working hard. He did say, he mentioned a couple of times that he had a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron, that it was a good call, that they understood each other's positions very well. But what this underscores really is just that the European Union and the other countries closing their borders really hold all the cards here. If they want to close their borders, they can do, and there's very little the UK can do about it. There did seem to be some sort of frustration in his voice when Boris Johnson actually said that he thought the transmission rate between one single person driving a lorry was probably, the likelihood was very, very low. So it really shows the sort of level of frustration here, and the British government obviously doing what it can, but it really is waiting for others to act to lift the borders and open those borders. We do know the European Union is talking amongst itself. The French Transport Minister earlier suggested that possibly new protocols could be in place, perhaps the testing of drivers. We're sort of guessing at the details, but obviously that is likely to come. But now it's not looking like we'll get a resolution today. This could drag on for a while.
Indeed, and retailers on that end of the world also saying that if these logistics links to continental Europe, if they continue to essentially be severed and are not rapidly restored, we're looking at some good shortages showing up on supermarket shelves in the UK. From their perspective, what needs to be done to ensure that the flow of fresh produce across the channel can be restored?
Yes, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, saying today, asking people to shop normally, saying that there was no need to panic buy. Well, of course, you can imagine the news of the ports and the closures, what that could happen. That indeed prompted, it appears, some people to go out and buy more shopping than they would normally, much to the frustration of the retailers that they have these bans in place. Sainsbury's, one of the big supermarket chains, the major supermarket chains in the UK, saying that if this lasted more than a few days, there would be gaps, and they would have some gaps in their produce, in fresh produce, citrus fruits, lettuces, that sort of thing. So obviously perhaps people went out to buy those today so they could be assured of them. So those retailers really counting on these closures and these bans being lifted. And as we were just discussing, it really seems that the British authorities can only do so much to try to persuade the other countries to open their borders, with the risk that this new variant poses.
Indeed. At the end of the day, though, we know that this mutated strain of COVID-19 is a bit more infectious than the original one. But what else do we know about it? How much more lethal is it, among other things? I mean, there are a lot of unknowns with regard to this new strain, aren't there?
There are a lot of unknowns, and the scientists are actually racing around the clock studying this to find out. What they do know is that the transmissibility is much higher. The figure has been given 70%, although the scientists then said they had reasonable confidence in that figure. So a lot is unknown. What we do know is we were originally talking about this variant being prevalent in London and the southeast of England. Well, today the leaders in both Scotland and Wales, separate nations of course, came out to say that in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister, said that that strain of virus had a foothold in Scotland. Wales said that 60% of the new cases that it was seeing could be traced back to that new variant. And the concern is that the numbers could grow and grow. And while the scientists say with some degree of confidence that it may not prove more dangerous, of course, if more people are being infected, then of course we could get greater number of people suffering badly, and we could get an increased fatality rate. And obviously the big concern is what this will mean for an already struggling National Health Service, which is dealing with this pandemic, with the flu season and other issues that obviously it needs to deal with.
Indeed, we'll leave it there for the time being. Catherine Drew in London. Thank you for your time this evening. Now then, let's turn our attention over to Nigeria. It might be heading to some pretty severe food scarcity as food reserves do continue to decline. There's been a long-running spate of conflict between farmers and herders and an insurgency in the country's northeast, and all of those have now combined to snowball into a full-blown food production crisis. The Farmers Association, in fact, is saying that these, alongside issues of climate change, have disrupted food supply chains completely, and COVID-19 is certainly not helping either. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with this report.
Emmanuel Wosu runs this fish farm in the outskirts of Nigeria's capital, Abuja. In the past, he and some of his workers would spend the night on the farm tending to the fish. That determined the output of their harvests. But now Wosu and his team work hurriedly to leave the farm before dark, as it has become more unsafe. Farmers around here have suffered series of attacks. This is affecting their productivity.
Since the insecurity in the country, all the storage systems has been demolished. That is the danger. This place those days, by this time, we have every one stocked. And when you want to sell, you are sure you want to sell about 20 to 30 tons. But this day, walk around, you can only see about 2 or 3 tons. Which because we are not sure of the security. So we take less risk so that to enable us to avert much of the loss. And that is why it is dangerous for the nation, and that is why it is dangerous for even the populace, and that's why the increasing hunger will continue.
Farmers Association has reported a worrying decline in food reserves. The country's food stock is less than 30,000 metric tons. grossly insufficient for the country's 200 million strong population. This is following a consistent surge in farmers' insecurity. The north, which is a seedling nestle for Nigeria, has become a hotspot for bandit attacks, insurgency, and clashes between farmer and herders. A dangerous trend for a nation making diversification efforts towards agriculture.
No need to look for employment. The empty lands is enough to give us what to eat. If people are being harnessed together, the clusters come together, there is acres of 100 acres of land that people can go and farm, government supporting them. There's acres area that people can go and fish, government supporting them. But when they are not sure of sleeping there, farmers sleep in the farm. That's why you call for. But when you can't sleep there, why are you there? You there, many of them are killed.
According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, 9.8 million Nigerians are already facing severe food crisis. It projects the numbers could go up to 13.8 million without urgent intervention. This is as Nigerians grapple with severe economic hardship and unemployment. The United Nations warned that continued violence combined with climate change and COVID-19 disruptions will hamper food production. With the already depleted food reserve, many fear that food scarcity could worsen across Nigeria. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
On to North Africa. Egypt's economy is forecast to keep growing over the next 2 fiscal years. The latest forecasts estimate growth of anywhere between 2.8% and 4% in 2021 and anywhere between 5.5% and 6.5% the year after. Here's CGTN's Yasser Kim with that report from Cairo.
The International Monetary Fund has just delivered to Egypt the second batch of a $5.2 billion standby loan and said the North African country's economic performance has exceeded expectations. According to the Washington-based lender, Egypt recorded one of the highest growth rates in 2020 due to its diversified economy and successful implementation of reforms initiated 4 years ago.
It was a collective effort by the presidency, the government and parliament. In parliament, we passed legislations that allow the government to move quickly and contain the effects of the coronavirus. We must also stress that the economic reforms of the last few years have been fundamental in creating a strong base for the economy to weather the storm, unlike other countries that witnessed huge economic and social setbacks.
High demand on Egyptian bonds, an 11% increase in foreign direct investments, and a record amount of remittances from people in the diaspora have made up for the losses in tourism and slowdown in industrial manufacturing. Going forward, Finance Minister Mohammed Maid expects growth to double over the next 2 fiscal years and touch 6%.
As you can see, projects are working at full speed everywhere in the country. The tourism and hotel sectors are slowly recovering, the aviation sector as well. Sectors that depend on trade and exports are also working. Then we have shops, restaurants, cinemas, theaters. All these will begin to operate at full capacity soon. Along with the strong petroleum and construction sectors, they will push growth rates between 5.5 to 6.5%.
But Maid has warned keeping a positive outlook is not an easy feat, considering the pandemic was still ravaging most parts of the world.
Dealing with the coronavirus is vital because the pandemic has had a big toll on us. It's essential that we continue on this path. We should not divert off the delicate policies we are implementing now. If we lose balance, then for example the budget deficit will become too big to handle. Debts will mushroom. Funds for projects will diminish. It will be a big problem. But as long as things continue as it is, we will be fine.
The government believes the next period is about building on this year's success, strengthening sectors damaged by the effects of the pandemic, and improving living conditions for Egyptians who suffered from the economic fallout caused by the novel coronavirus. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, on to a story that neatly illustrates the problems around climate change. Abundant rains have pounded West Africa in recent months, and they have caused some catastrophic flooding in some parts of the region. And that has raised concerns about the rising cost, both human, social, economic, of extreme weather events. But here's a flip side of that. This year's downpour has also created the thickest vegetation in years, and that's a vital relief for Senegal's farmers and its 3 million strong herding community, especially after 6 years of drought. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with that story.
This time of the year, Senegal experiences extremely dry seasons. But this time round, what is normally parched earth is flourishing. A lifeline for many of the herders in the northern region.
Thank God, this year we have grass. You see, the grass is still fresh at this time of the year. Last year, during the same period, grass was already dry and there was not much of it. Now the grass is still green. The last rain was 2 months ago. This year is much better than last year.
But behind the blessing lurks a danger. With so much vegetation, herders fear bushfires could easily wipe out the pasture. And water for animals will also become difficult to come by as the dry season progresses.
This year we remain worried because the grass is tall and a lot of herders, especially the large-scale ones, are afraid of bushfires.
Herders are not used to unexpected benefits in the Sahel's semi-arid prairies. The land now has nutritious plants the herders feared was becoming scarce.
You see now, because of the high rainfall, the good grazing fodder plant has appeared, which is great for grazing animals.
Even the coronavirus pandemic became less of a concern to the urgent pastoralist needs.
With the rain, we even forgot that COVID exists. We even forgot that the disease exists in the region because here we are in the silvopastoral area. The herder always thinks of feeding his animals before himself. So if nature smiles on them, they forget all their problems.
The rains have also boosted other sectors. Grain output is expected to jump over 30% this year, prompting Senegal to reverse its economic outlook for 2020 from contraction to growth.
God is making human beings face an existential crisis. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. Our fears are real. We have not experienced such heavy rainfall in more than 30 years. The previous year's rainy seasons lasted for 2 months, which is too short for planting. But God decides.
Dramatic climate swings year to year are normal for the Sahel region, making it hard to assess the impact of climate change on current conditions. But if dry seasons keep getting hotter, as projected by climate models, some herders doubt the sustainability of their way of life, given their struggle to get through recent dry seasons. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
We're taking another break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Tensions between China and Australia stalling talks on a review of a free trade agreement. And JD Health initial public offer set to top Hong Kong's listing this year.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories, are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in South Africa, authorities over there have identified a new variant of the coronavirus that is driving a second wave of infections. South African researchers have identified this new variant after sequencing hundreds of samples, and they noticed that this one was dominant in samples collected in the last 2 months. They're studying if vaccines in the market at the moment against COVID-19 will also offer protection against this new strain. In Australia, 2 cases of the same new coronavirus strain have also been identified in New South Wales. They're among 6 new cases in people returning from overseas. Authorities do stress that no one with this virus mutation is believed to be in the community. Australia has shut her borders to all non-citizens since March in an effort to cut off the disease. The country says it has no plans to suspend flights with the UK, at least not at the moment. The leaders of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD countries, it's a grouping of 7 East African nations, met on Sunday in Djibouti. Among the issues discussed was the conflicts in Ethiopia and the border conflicts between Ethiopia and Sudan and Kenya's diplomatic spat with. That's a run through your headlines. Vaccinations for residents in the European Union member states could start in days. The European Medical Agency is expected to approve the use of Pfizer's BioNTech's vaccine as early as Monday. Here's CGTN's Nicole Johnston for that story.
This was the moment the world had been waiting for.
Bye. Thank you.
The first person to be vaccinated with the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine after it was approved by the UK. The European Union is also preparing to approve its first vaccine, and it's ordered a mix of them.
There are normally bumps along the road, and there are bottlenecks along the road, and we can't afford too many of them if we want to. But I think it's feasible, but it does require an unprecedented collaboration, for example, among the international regulators.
The EU has ordered 225 million doses of vaccine from the German company CureVac, 300 million from the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, 200 million from Johnson & Johnson. The Sanofi GSK vaccine won't be ready until the end of 2021, but 300 million doses have been ordered. For Pfizer-BioNTech, it's 300 million doses, 80 million. With a number of vaccines showing promising results in trials, there is optimism that next year will be better, despite Europe now being in the grip of a second wave of the pandemic.
Biggest volume vaccines ever produced, if you exclude flu shots, is 450 million doses. Now in COVID-19, we talk about 12 to 15 billion doses because we most likely will need 2 doses per person. And when you look at the global need, therefore, it is daunting. It's doubling or even tripling global vaccine manufacture capacity. But I believe it's doable.
If all goes to plan, Germany hopes to start vaccinating in early January in indoor arenas and disused airports. It's already cut its own deal with Pfizer for 40 million doses and has set up 400 vaccination centres. And Hungary has imported Russia's Sputnik vaccine that hasn't been vetoed by the European Medicines Agency.
The other concern is even convincing people to have the vaccine. A recent study found that 1 in 3 people in France believe that vaccines are unsafe. And in Hungary and Poland, 40% of people say that they would not take a vaccine if it was offered to them. But the situation is better here in the UK, where 70% of people say that they will take a vaccine if it's approved by regulators.
Pressure is growing on the EU to follow the UK and approve a vaccine. It shortened its timeline to do it, but with 27 members, the process is bureaucratic. Still, approval is expected to come any day now. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Now, negotiators of a Brexit trade deal on both sides inched ever so slowly towards a bit of a compromise on fishing rights on Sunday, but they missed a significant deadline. And that raises a prospect of weeks without a formal trading arrangement from the 1st of January, even if an agreement is arrived at between the UK and the EU between now and the 30th of December. The teams led by the chief UK negotiator, David Frost, and his EU counterpart, Michel Barnier, were expected to continue trade talks on Monday, despite the European Parliament's notice that it would not vote on a deal if it was not secured by midnight on Sunday, the 20th of December. Now, UK government source said the talks do remain difficult, and there's still quite a few significant differences between the two sides. Earlier on, we spoke to our correspondent in Brussels, Tony Waterman. She gave us this update.
There is that hard December 31st deadline, perhaps got a little bit firmer today because there had been some talks that perhaps there could be an extension to the transition period just so that negotiations can continue or wrap up, or that members of parliament could ratify the deal if one is reached. But Boris Johnson swatted that away pretty fiercely earlier today, saying that there will be no extension to this transition period. Also kind of rejecting the idea of any provisional implication or imposition of this deal, that it would be put in provisionally while you're waiting for members of parliament on either sides of the channel to ratify this deal. We are now 10 days away from the end of the transit. Fish, that is the major issue. The EU gave concessions over the weekend. It increased the amount of that it would give back when it comes to fishing, the value of the fish, I should say, rather, that it would be giving back to the UK. It increased that from 18% to 25%, but that still doesn't seem to be enough for the UK, not biting there. Also, it's the phasing in period of when these new rules are going to take hold, that there's still a big gap between the two sides on that. So we are getting close to the end. There's still talk that we could see a deal before Christmas, but we could even come down right up against that December 31st deadline if there is going to be a deal at all.
Markets. This is the biggest listing in Hong Kong this year. JD Health International, it's an arm of the Chinese e-commerce giant JD.com, raised close to $3.5 billion on the 8th of December. 70% of net proceeds from that listing will be used to expand the business, as well as go into covering research and development costs. Wei Ling Tan finds out if Chinese consumers, though, are ready for the future of healthcare services online.
Buying almost anything under the sky and getting it swiftly delivered. That is the norm in China these days. And now you can even do it for a wide range of medicinal and healthcare products. The delivery time, just 30 minutes. One of the players in all of this, JD Health International, recently listed in Hong Kong.
According to data by the Southern Medicine Economic Research Institute, the absolute value of the increase in online drug sales in China this year is about 2.4 times of what's sold offline. With the gradual liberalization of China's online drug prescription policies, online medical care has the potential to develop.
In the past 3 years, JD Health derived close to 90% of its revenues from selling pharmaceutical and healthcare products. But according to its IPO prospectus, it's actually the latter, the non-pharmaceutical products such as medical supplies, devices, contact lenses, and family planning products that are taking up the majority of sales.
Now, this is a market with already a couple of existing players, but what JD Health is aiming to achieve is what it defines as a closed-loop business model. Basically, it wants to direct its user base from its present retail pharmacy business to its healthcare services segment, and through offerings such as family doctor and chronic disease management, in turn drive user traffic back again to its retail pharmacy business, where people can buy other stuff such as health supplements and medical devices.
Now, is China ready for this?
From the looks of it, the development trends are good, but there are bottlenecks. For the first-time diagnosis and the diagnosis of major diseases, face-to-face consultations still work better. So online consultations work more when renewing prescriptions. Consumers should also have ability to China's medical insurance when buying prescription medicines online. Monitoring guidelines may be more strict as the country's medical insurance takes shape. Another risk is whether online sales for prescription medicines change in the future, and whether they encounter regulatory obstacles.
According to business consulting firm Frost & Sullivan, JD Health was the largest online healthcare platform in China with a total revenue of nearly 11 billion yuan. That's more than $1.5 billion US. As of June 2020, JD Health's retail pharmacy business had more than 70 million annual users.
As long as it's under the guidance of doctors, where accurate diagnosis and treatment can be made in time, I don't mind if consultations are done online or offline.
I think it depends on the type of sickness. If it's something flu, online consultations are actually more convenient, as I don't have to register and queue at the hospital. But overall, my hope is that the citizens of the entire country have access to good doctors and that medical resources are evened out.
Almost 2 weeks post-listing, shares of the company are still holding up, though it acknowledges the healthcare, e-commerce, and online healthcare services industries it operates in are relatively new, and it's uncertain if they'll be able to meet the high demand. Wei Lin Tang, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is due for its first 5-year review since it came in 2015. But recent tensions between the two countries appear to have stalled any talks on that trade deal, which has produced economic gains for both sides. Here's CGTN's Greg that story.
The road to get to this moment in 2015 was a long one. 10 years of negotiations before China and Australia formally enter into a free trade agreement.
It was more than symbolic, I would say. I think the fact that they spent a lot of time actually negotiating the deal, it was a very full. The idea was that Australia and China would slowly get rid of tariffs.
That's exactly what happened for many Australian exporters, especially where tariffs were either greatly reduced or, in the case of wine producers, completely eliminated. There have been several economic successes since that agreement went into effect, least of which is the fact that two-way trade between the two countries has risen by about 100 billion Australian dollars. The free trade agreement was also designed to increase access for exporters in both countries. For Australia, that helped to add greater diversity in the goods it sends to China.
10 years ago, it was nearly all about iron ore. That moved into other minerals and energy products like LNG, and since Chapter's signing, it's been in the agricultural sphere.
Led by beef and dairy, Australia exported about 13 billion Australian dollars worth of agricultural products to China last year. China has also benefited from the relationship. The demand for many Australian agricultural products has grown among China's rising middle class. The anchor of that economic relationship continues to be iron ore, even throughout the pandemic. Australia is the world's largest exporter. China is the world's biggest consumer.
Let's be clear that nowadays Australia is China's 5th largest goods import source. Now that's an extraordinary outcome when you think that compared with many of the other big countries and economies around the world, Australia is not particularly large.
The souring diplomatic relationship between the two countries has impacted some of those economic gains this year. That includes tariffs being placed on Australian wine and barley exports. It comes at a time when the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is scheduled for its first review.
The expectation the market has got is that the deal will not be stopped in any way. It's a review process, so it's not a renegotiation.
Experts believe the current political climate means that any discussions on how to improve upon the trade agreement between the two countries will likely have to wait. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Amid tightening lockdowns and high COVID-19 infection rates, many festive events have had to be cancelled right across Germany, but none have been quite as noticeable as a closure of the country's traditional Christmas markets, as Natalie Carney now reports from Munich.
It's hard to imagine the Yuletide season without the sights, sounds and smells of Germany's festive Weihnachtsmarkt or Christmas markets. But this year, squares, pedestrian paths and alleyways, usually bustling with activity at this time of year, are eerily quiet.
In non-corona times, this square would be host to one of the biggest and certainly most popular Christmas markets in all the city. The air would be filled with the smells of cinnamon ginger and, of course, mulled wine. There'd be hundreds, if not thousands, of people admiring the festive trinkets in the many different kiosks that would line this square, while Christmas music filled the air. But these are not normal times.
It's the first Christmas these women have experienced without the public festive atmosphere.
The Christmas markets are very much missing here because everything feels as if it's dead. It is not decorated a bit, no lantern, nothing. There doesn't need to be booths, but there could have been a little something more.
We're angry because there's no Christmas markets and such. We're used to coming into town for the Christmas markets and, of course, the mulled wine.
The decision to close Germany's Christmas markets was due to the country's stubbornly high COVID-19 infection rates. It is feared that the tight, cozy alleyways filled with people eating and drinking could pose a high risk of contamination. While many do agree with the closures, the economic impact of canceling all of Germany's 2,500 Christmas markets to the roughly 160 million annual visitors will be felt far and wide. The city of Munich is offering many of the public and private stall owners to market themselves through the city's web portal.
We have tried to bring this Christmas market online from the physical real representation to present the digital Christmas market, and all the stalls that you would normally find on the work through the city center can now be viewed digitally.
But many others can't depend on online sales. Spen Hildegard, who runs a hot chestnut stand where the city's main Christmas market is usually held, says she will be losing out big due to its closure.
Well, if the Christmas market isn't there, then sales aren't there either. There's a lot less going on. People don't even dare to go into town that much anymore. Tourists are also missing.
Some communities, however, have managed to organize corona-compliant Christmas events, such as the municipality of Unterbrunn, where a drive-through Christmas market is available to inspire that warm, festive feeling. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
Quick run through commodity prices for you. Oil prices is our starting point. It had a really shaky start to Monday's trading session. Brent futures falling by over 3%. Platinum not far behind, an intraday decline of 4.56%. At just over $50.20, Brent futures had risen by nearly 19.5% in the second half of the year. Copper as well, arguably one of the big beneficiaries of the vaccine-driven optimism, if you want to call it that, especially after the beating it took back in March. It was around $4,000 a ton back then. Copper forwards in London have since then risen by just under 30%. Spot gold came close to $1,900 an ounce, but even at $1,882, bullion prices up by nearly 30% so far in 2020. Here's what's coming up next. When we come back, it's not Bruce Wayne, well, not quite, but we'll introduce you to an Egyptian Batman enthusiast leading the fight against COVID-19.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. The American comic book superhero Batman has always taken on the challenge of battling crime of an Earth variety or even the cosmic variety, depending on which particular version of the DC universe you're talking about. But unlike Bruce Wayne, this enthusiast in Egypt isn't really interested in keeping his identity anonymous as he takes on the challenge of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. With Bassam Rao's story, here's CGTN's Will Kistanyawa on Grassroots.
The streets of Cairo may be a long way from Gotham City, but among its citizens dwells a superhero. Bassam Raouf is a Batman enthusiast. Like many super funds around the world, the 28-year-old had always dreamt of having his own Batmobile to drive around town. Today, he is living that dream.
Batman is a character who many around the world grew up knowing. Both old and young people like him. I too love Batman. I wanted one day to own a car similar to Batman's car. While driving along the road, people always stop me to take pictures. While I used to run errands, it used to take me 10 minutes, but now it takes me up to an hour or an hour and a half. This makes me really happy, and before I leave the house now, I always designate more time for my errands while taking this into consideration.
Far from being a fictional crime solver, Bassem Rauf has taken off the challenge of battling the COVID-19 pandemic. Egypt's version of Bruce Wayne drives around in a replica version of the Batmobile, similar to the one that appeared in the Dark Knight trilogy.
This new year, we do not need Santa Claus, we need a legend, a character known around the world as a hero. We need this character in the streets to spread awareness, gift giving. This year should be masks and other materials with the aim of raising awareness, because this period we are going into needs more awareness, and people both young and old need to be more aware.
Unlike Bruce Wayne, Rauf prefers not to keep his identity anonymous. He is busy handing out face masks to residents he finds along his usual route.
It's such a wonderful idea, especially since cases in Egypt are beginning to rise. And it's important for everyone in Egypt to start wearing masks and taking precautions.
On December 10th, Egypt received its first shipment of a coronavirus vaccine from the Chinese company Sinopharm, which is said to be 86% effective. The vaccine will be free for Egyptians, with the first doses being reserved for healthcare workers and at-risk populations. The North African nation has so far recorded more than 126,000 cases of COVID-19. Over 7,000 people have succumbed to the virus. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
And we wrap up with a run through some of the currencies, both fiat and the crypto varieties. South Africa's rand clawing back most of the losses incurred in the first half of the year after it reported its first COVID-19 case in the first quarter of the year. By December 19, there were about 2.5 million COVID cases across the continent. South Africa by itself accounted for nearly 37% of those. Like other EM currencies, the rand did get hammered today, really, as a surge of COVID-19 cases was reported mostly in the Western world. But this did cut a 5-day rally in the currency. In the crypto world, Bitcoin is up above $23,200, up 1.5% at 16:39 GMT. Nothing else. 2020 has been a dizzying year for Bitcoin, with a 220% rise so far this year. That's a run through your currencies, and that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you see on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.